Hi guys, I'm so glad everyone's here with me today. Thank you so much for coming to another one of my live streams. It means the world to me. My personal life has been quite difficult lately, as the reality of the fact that I only have about a year left to live is slowly sinking in. But I plan on making this the best year yet and enjoying every moment of it. As far as Was I Ever Normal goes, we last left Cassie after her overdose on her Paxil. The voices had convinced her that if one Paxil wasn't enough to make her happy, then maybe 10 Paxil would do the trick. Here we are in chapter 17 today, where Cassie is still being tormented by the voices that she can't figure out how to ignore or disobey. So I've got 3 people here, so I'm going to start reading. Here is chapter 17 of Was I Ever Normal? Hi Faith. I'm doing all right. I'm hanging in. Just trying to take things one moment at a time and just make each moment count. Here we go. Chapter 17 of Was I Ever Normal? My second overdose happened right before the end of the school year. It was more serious than the first. I took about 20 pills that time. I had gathered the pills from the medicine cabinets of various acquaintances at the advice of my own mounting depression and the constant voices that never stopped talking, singing, hissing, laughing, yelling, and whispering. I sort of wanted to die that time, and I also just wanted to do what the voices told me to. So maybe they would leave me alone. I waited about half an hour after taking the pills, but soon I was getting worried about the logistics of suicide. I was worried about how my parents would cope. I was worried because there was parts of my life that I still enjoyed. And I was worried that the pills would just damage my organs. And I didn't want to have to live with damaged organs for the rest of my life. So I told my mom what I had done. She sighed and told me to get in the car. I found myself back in the ER again. I got lectured by different well-meaning but misunderstanding ER personnel. I was subjected to medical tests. I was forced to choke down charcoal, and then I had to meet with yet another obnoxious crisis worker, who thankfully sent me home because the overdose wasn't lethal and seemed more manipulative than anything. I was sick of people telling me I was manipulative. I was sick of stupid crisis workers. I was relieved that I could go home. My next appointment with Sandra was almost completely unbearable. She showed me the report from the crisis worker. It said that I most probably had borderline personality disorder. Even the word itself sounded bad. It got worse when Sandra showed me the DSM-5 and explained to me what it was. She said that people with borderline personality disorder have frantic attempts to avoid real or imagined abandonment, patterns of unstable and intense relationships with other people, unstable self-image, impulsivity when it comes to self-damaging behaviors, suicidal behavior and/or self-mutilating behavior, mood swings that happen every few hours, feeling empty all the time, difficult controlling intense and inappropriate anger, paranoia. I sat there without responding for a moment. I didn't think I worried too much about being abandoned. I knew my parents loved and cared for me unconditionally and would never leave me no matter what. I had a difficult relationship with my parents lately. Hi, Vivian. But it wasn't unstable. My relationship with Anne and Christine was fine. So were my relationships with everyone else in my life, except for Sandra. I didn't have an unstable self-image. I knew who I was and didn't constantly change my opinion about that. I was only impulsive when the voices or blenderized thoughts got really intense and took over my brain. I did have suicidal and self-mutilating behavior, but that was only when the voices were bad. I did have mood swings, but they didn't change every few hours, more like every few months. And I had also been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And the main symptom of bipolar disorder is mood swings that shift every few months. I didn't feel empty. I was filled up with too many thoughts and feelings to feel empty. I did get angry, but not more than most people. Okay, I was really paranoid. The diagnosis didn't feel right. I only had 2, maybe 3 of all the symptoms. Doesn't it say that a person has to have 5 of these symptoms in order to be diagnosed with borderline? Asked Sandra, pointing to the top of the page in the DSM-5. You do have 5, Sandra told me. You have problems with relationships. You're obviously very impulsive. You definitely have suicidal and self-harming behaviors. Your mood swings all the time. Your mom tells me 1 minute you're talking to her and acting fine, and the next you close down. You also have anger problems. Your parents have told me about those. And you're very paranoid about a variety of issues. That's 6 of the symptoms right there. I shoved my hands into fists inside my hoodie's pockets. Sandra was so full of herself. There was a simple reason behind a lot of my behavior that apparently made me seem borderline. It was that I had a constant vacuum of voices trying to suck me into a different reality. Part of me wanted to just tell the truth to Sandra, right then and there, just so she would know that she didn't know everything. The truth is not yours to tell. Hang on, guys, sorry. I lost my spot. You will be one sorry girl if you try to tell anyone about us. Understand? Shivering at Fellingham's voice, I nodded quietly and curled into a smaller ball on Sandra's couch after trying to argue a little longer about why I did not have borderline personality disorder. I just gave up and started crying. I cried so hard that Sandra asked me if I needed to be evaluated by crisis. She even called my dad in to tell him how upset I was. I crunched my body even closer together and hid my eyes. From then on, pretty much every session with Sandra consisted of us arguing over my diagnosis. In family therapy, we talked more about how my parents could punish me so that I would stop hurting myself and cutting myself and being bad. I grew more and more desperate. The truth lingered at the edge of my lips. If I could be honest, maybe people could offer me the right kind of help and rescue me from this nightmare I was living in that most people didn't even know existed. Fighting against the truth were the voices, whispering and then screaming threats. Sometimes, when I came particularly close to blurting everything out, I would get sucked in. This cold feeling of hopelessness and being completely alone and lost in a foreign world would come over me. Everything in the normal reality would blur into a foggy desolateness. I would feel stuck. I would feel the sensation of falling down a long, dark rabbit hole that definitely didn't lead to a wonderland. The truth blasted out halfway through the summer, a month after my 12th birthday. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I figured that the hell I had trapped myself in with all the lies and hiding, couldn't possibly be any worse than the hell Fellingham, Para, and the others intended on putting me through if I told. I was sitting on Sandra's couch for individual therapy. She was talking to me about how I needed to learn how to control my urges to cut better, without offering any skills or tips on how to control these urges, beyond just using more willpower. I was staring at the picture of the goldfish in a glass bowl with its bugged out eyes that were looking straight back at me, hanging in a frame on the wall of her office. "Can I tell you something?" I asked Sandra. Everything in my body had tensed itself up and was trembling hard and fast. "Sure, what is it?" Sandra replied, staring me down in her intimidating way. "Don't do this. Don't say this. If you know what's good for you, you will shut up now. Come on, little brat, you talk about us and you will be sorry." "She won't say it. Don't worry. But if she does, then we suck her in again. She knows the consequences. She'll keep her mouth shut." I spit the words out fast before I could change my mind, before the chatter of the voices could intimidate me into silence. I hear voices talking to me sometimes, voices that no one else can hear. Sometimes I see weird things too. It scares me. Sandra nodded slowly. I could feel the cold chill creeping up my spine. I could feel fingers of cold reaching down into my soul, pulling me into darkness. The room started to fog over. I pulled my body into a ball and dropped my head into my arms. "You fucking bitch! You whore! You idiot! You retard! Do you know what you just did?" The voices reverberated against the thick fog. I felt my face getting wet, but I wasn't aware of the actual sensation of crying. I curled my body tighter and wished I could disappear. I don't know how long I was stuck like that. It was an experience I referred to as getting sucked in. It was a way for the voices to pull me out of reality and into their world. They did it to punish me. The next thing I was aware of was a hand on my shoulder. I jumped. My heart gave a jolt. It was my dad. "We're going to go home." His tone was tense and short. I uncurled myself and stood up. I avoided looking at Sandra and my dad. As we walked out of the room, Sandra didn't believe me. She never outright said she didn't believe me, but I could tell she thought I was making up stories. She asked me a lot of questions about the voices, and I actually answered them as honestly as I could. Whenever I gave away more about the voices, I felt a cold chill, like I was going to get sucked in. The chills got weaker the more I talked about them, and part of me felt stronger now that I was able to talk about them aloud. When I told Sandra about how I cut because they demanded blood, and how cutting made them quieter, she gave me a long look and then asked me, "Are you sure you're not just trying to make yourself feel less guilty for cutting?" "I'm sure," I told her, as a bolt of anger slammed through my gut. Here I was, making myself vulnerable and telling her truths I had never told anyone before, and she was just sitting there doubting me. I started to wonder if anyone would believe me. I had told Sandra the truth, hoping that she would be able to do something to help me out and get me feeling better. After all, she was a licensed professional. Now, I was getting scared. If a licensed psychologist couldn't help me, then maybe nobody could help me. Maybe I would be forced to suffer at the hands of Fellingham and the others for the rest of my life. If that was the case, then maybe I wanted to make sure that the rest of my life didn't last for much longer. I decided that before I did anything drastic, I would talk to my parents. After all, they were both pretty smart people. They knew me better than pretty much anyone else, so maybe they could help me. I told my parents about the voices. They listened. They didn't argue with me. They didn't ask any questions. They just listened. Then they never brought up the subject again for the rest of the summer. It was September by the time I figured out that even my brilliant and confident parents, who I always thought knew everything, couldn't help me get the voices to be quiet and stop torturing me. I felt even worse than before I had told. At least before I told, I could harbor the hope that if I someday managed to disclose the horrors that were haunting me, then maybe someone could help me feel safer, clearer, happier, and more normal. Now that I had told, there was no hope left for me to harbor. I felt like all of the hope had just been squeezed out of me, and all I was left with was a dark cloud of suffocating depression. I was having trouble eating again, but this time it had nothing to do with worrying about poison in my food or needing to be purer. This time, I just wasn't hungry. I was just way too depressed. Sandra kept telling me I was going to get myself sick. Dr. Kimmins told me I was losing too much weight again. My parents reminded me about how unhappy I was when I had to be tube-fed by NG-tube. I tried to eat to make the people around me leave me alone, but I couldn't manage much. I just felt too drained to do anything. I lost interest in pretty much everything. I no longer felt motivated to do my schoolwork. Even writing didn't hold the same appeal it once did. I still hung out with Anne and Christine, but I felt like I was acting when I tried to smile around them and when we played together. I felt like I was just going through the robotic motions. Even my occasional laughs sounded slightly robotic. They could tell something was up and held me extra long when they hugged me. I stopped going to dance class. My parents and Dr. Kimmins thought that I wasn't eating enough to dance. I didn't care that much anymore. I felt like my insides had been scooped out and put through a food processor and replaced as unidentifiable mush. I almost died in the middle of October, the year I was 12. Things had been bad for about 2.5 months. Things had been miserable for about 2 weeks. We were at my grandparents' house. I had started hearing the narrator narrating my every move. In my head, I was imagining myself 10 years down the road as a bag lady who lives on the street and talks to herself as she pushes a stroller down the street with a baby doll in it, and her arms loaded up with trash bags of her only belongings. I realized that at the rate things were going, by the time I was 22 years old, it was very probable that I would no longer be able to function, even as well as I was functioning now. My parents probably wouldn't be able to deal with me anymore, and that probably was my future. I also realized that I didn't want to live another 10 years. It felt like too much. I didn't even want to live another 10 days. Things hurt too much and were too overwhelming. I had tried to get help. I had played all my cards, and still, no one had been able to help me. On October 17th, 2016, my mom and I were visiting my grandparents' house. I walked up the stairs to the second floor bathroom with no intention of actually using the bathroom. All I had in my head was a picture of all the heavy-duty pills in my grandparents' medicine cabinet. For once, the voices were silent. All I had to consider were my own desperate and suicidal thoughts. Once I was in the upstairs bathroom, I felt my breath slow and my heart even out. I opened the cabinet, cringing at the screech it made. It was as if the cabinet were calling out to warn my mother that she was about to lose her only daughter. No one heard the screech, or at least thought twice of it. Unlike the other two overdoses, this time my full intent was to die. The only thought floating around in my head as I pawed through the medicine cabinet was ending all this pain that the last 12 years had been littered with. As I pulled out extra strength aspirin, blood pressure lowering agents, Tylenol, opioid pain relievers, sleeping pills, muscle relaxants, diuretics, medication for cardiac arrhythmias, Benadryl, blood thinners, and even more bottles of pills that I didn't recognize with unknown functions. I didn't care what the pills were intended for. My only use for them was to relieve the pain of life by inducing death. And that is the end of chapter 17, Giving Up. I hope you guys enjoyed that chapter. If you have any questions, you can ask me them right now. You have the answer. Anyone have any questions? Comments? Anything? The next chapter, it is a suspenseful chapter. Yeah, you'll have to hear the next chapter to find out what happened. Alright, well, I'll end right here. Hope you guys enjoyed the live. Look forward to seeing you next time. Alright, bye guys. Really impactful, thank you. That's what I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be impactful. I'm glad you found it impactful. I love all you guys so much. Thanks for listening to my live stream. Love you. See you next time.